Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Making Rounds, the show that occasionally exists when there are international events, when a company called ESPN lets Emily partake. However, we no longer have to worry about that. So, I didn't even have to
Yay.
jump through that hoop. We can just go right in and talk about mid-season invitational League of Legends video
Woo.
gaming, not to be confused with Valorant, which is also taking place in Iceland. I don't even know what that event is called, nor do I care to look it up right now.
I
I'm
think people are have been calling it the Valor LAN, like with the LAN at the end for obvious reasons. But I don't think that's the official title.
mm,
I think it's I should know this because I was watching the. It's not First Strike, I don't think. Anyway, should be hype.
should be very exciting. I agree. I don't know anything about Valorant at all. I don't even know what the champion things are called. So that's all good. Um, what I do know is League of Legends video gaming because I spend most of my life talking about and thinking about League of Legends video gaming. So, for us at the Midseason Invitational, there is a very interesting format, right? There's three groups with kind of a set or a ringer major region team, as you will say, and then teams that try to fight the major region team to get out of the group. Very fun, right? Very exciting. So the question is, Emily Rand, do these minor region teams have a chance of basically upsetting the major region teams in each group and getting out? So we're probably going to go through the group one by one, talk a little bit about the identity of, I guess, like it's almost a king of the hill type situation where you've
hmm
got like the king and then the two teams fighting under them, the two or three teams, I guess in group A there are two and the rest there are three fighting under them to take them down. So we'll talk a little bit about the king and then the challengers, as you will say, and see if that's even an appropriate designation in all cases. So, without further ado, let's talk about Group A with Pentanet GG. Unfortunately, no VCS team. Royal Never Give Up and Unicorns of Love.
I'm so sad that the VCS team couldn't be here. It's GAM Esports, for those that don't know. I would have been really curious to see them go up against RNG specifically. But now it is basically the way people are seeing this group. Also, the way I am pretty much seeing this group is RNG at the top and then UOL and Pentanet.gg fighting each other to get out.
So, let's talk a little bit about RNG then, unless you would dispute and say that unicorns are actually the kings, or Pentanet
No,
perhaps.
I would
Okay.
not.
So,
No offense to either of those teams, I'm just saying.
So Royal Never Give Up is interesting because I think that there's this really weird conception that you can win the game. Basically, a team identity can consist of two things right now, right? One is you're really good laners and you crush your early game, you stack dragons, and you take
hmm
it from there. And then the other way would be you're super good at team fighting, coming back from a deficit, stalling out the soul points, and basically going for the Elder Drake or Baron to close out these types of categories. My question to you, Emily Rand, is do you believe Royal Never Give Up falls into either of those categories?
I don't. They really love their split pushing setups to like almost to a fault. Despite the fact that I think that like the like I don't even want to say best, but the most interesting way to play the map for me is splitting it up like this, right? And having really good side wave control. But I have seen like RNG eschew mid lane control for side lanes like several times over the course of this year. Um, and that makes them very different. It made them kind of an oddity, in my opinion, in LPL. Like, I don't think we're seeing what people are going to think of when they think of a stereotypical. Like, if you're going into this and you're thinking that RNG is the stereotype, even if you're thinking that they're their own stereotype, so not even just the LPL stereotype, but their own stereotype where it's like, they're gonna play really slow and they're gonna 5v5 you and they're gonna pour everything into bot lane, which that's a different bot lane for RNG is a whole different story. But they're not even like particularly their own stereotype, I don't think, outside of 2018, I believe, was kind of when the year they won MSI, where they cleaned up their early game enough to really make the most of like their 1-3-1 and 4-1 setups. And that was kind of how they won, in my opinion, even though a lot of people really classified them as this like massive 5v5 team as well. So there's a little bit of that. But I think RNG are like even oh, by the way, whenever I say RNG, I keep hearing Dagda's voice in my head saying orangey. Yeah. Every time I say it now, it's just ingrained into my brain. But so when I think of this team, I don't even think of like this is a team that holistically represents what we saw a lot of in the LPL either, which is interesting. I mean, it's interesting to have RNG end up being the representative after semifinals. Actually, I would say after round 4 when FPX 3-0'd them, I honestly thought it was going to be FPX going to MSI. And that did not end up being the case because RNG kind of course corrected a lot of the things that they had messed up in the FPX game. Primarily, the most obvious one was the over-reliance on the Gnar for Xiaohu, which FPX ended up calling their bluff on that. So yeah, that's kind of a really broad overview of what I think of RNG without going like too far into specifics of their playstyle and stuff.
I think it's really interesting to talk about FPX and RNG and their dynamic because this was something that I talked about consistently, is that there is a very clear draft for most of the top teams in LPL that, you know, it's almost like the cake that they shouldn't have, that for some reason they keep like reaching for it in the fridge in the middle of the night and lose games by going for the cake. But it's like you guys know how, like, the identity around which you win. For example, we can talk about the RNG one, but using EDGs as a template, it's like they can't play like the scaling front to back style. They have to play like this all-in kind of pick comp because they don't really have, I would say EDG seriously lack discipline as a team. They basically have to take the fights in some sense, especially around Drakes. So for them, it was like if you saw them play, you know, Azir, Aphelios, it's like this is their cake, you know, that they shouldn't be having in the middle of the night. They need to go back to the nice salad with a little bit of like salmon on the side, you know, Kaisa sets, etc. But it's like for FPX, we didn't really know what that looked like until, you know, RNG sort of reminded us of what FPX's cake always has been, which is like not being able to play mid jungle support 3v3s, right? So they targeted specifically the support pool. RNG specifically targeted the support pool to maintain like favorable support matchups so that they could control like when they had skirmishes around mid, and that's when FPX's limitations came up. In terms of RNG, I would say they reached for their cake in the first FPX series where they were blinding top lane and picking tanks for Xiaohu, which I would say his survive side wave management is still poor. His ability, the team's ability to win games when they can't drag opponents across the map is bad. I would say that their team fighting isn't great, and they really succeed off of taking numbers advantaged fights out of the map pressure that they can exert. So for me, that's like kind of how we see RNG, and they, when they pick like the J solution and then they play really, really hard for side lanes and control like that's when they succeed. So yep.
And getting Gala on comfortable champions. I don't want to like rag too much on Gala, but I do think there's a noticeable difference in when he's on Kaisa and Tristana versus other picks. So that's another thing to keep in mind when you think about RNG. But he played a lot better than I thought he was going to in the finals. So
I would also say that LWX was choosing
he had a rough
run it down.
He had a really rough series.
Potentially. But it was funny because it was like, do we praise Gala really highly, or do we? Because this was the interesting thing for me, because I did the show with Munchables and Frost, I think, which was before the final, which was along the lines of like basically we had to pick an overperformer, and I picked Gala because I think in playoffs he showed up a lot more than he did in regular season. In regular season, there were just so many instances where he was just completely fat fingering abilities, or just like ulting the wrong direction, and you could clearly see him trying to understand where the threats were, but failing to dodge them, like stuff like that. It was just really weird. But he looked a lot more in form in playoffs. Do I think that he's considered an S tier AD carry? I saw someone ranking ADs, and they had Gala at the top as the only S tier AD carry. I mean, AD carry is an interesting topic, and maybe we can talk about this as like a sidebar. But I feel like the ADs of this event are a little underwhelming. So.
Yeah, compared to other ADs in their regions, for the most part, there's one glaring exemption I'm thinking of right now, and that could just be because I really only had time to watch their finals. So I'll touch on that later because it's a minor region team. But for the most part, I think because of the way the meta is right now, and because a lot of it is focused on how well you lane just generally, because if you have pushing lanes, then your jungler, who is like a kind of important carry, can farm a lot more easily and also affect lanes a lot more easily. But then you also have just a lot more volatility on the top side of the map right now in top lane, I think. And I think that's reflected in a lot of the teams we see here. Most of them are, if not like specifically topside focused, tend to really rely on their topside to carry, whether that is through team fighting or whether that's through like just raw laning power.
And I do think side laning is kind of key, even though we see, like, it's really weird because you look at the AD picks, and a lot of them are hyper carries, right? And a lot of the top lane picks are more focused on these tanks, right? So that's very strange as well, because you talk about volatile, but then you look at a team like Damwon, and it's like 18 games of Scion.
Yeah.
And then occasionally he has to play something else.
If he knows how he plays the lane, though, he still pushes that thing out pretty far. So I mean,
sometimes
just up there.
When I was doing my Damwon VOD review on stream, I was like, if you notice, Khan can't overextend on the champion. So
it's perfect.
But I guess the big thing for me is that even though we have like this kind of descriptive identity, I would say when you are watching the actual games, it's like side lane pressure that's actually winning. And I think that to an extent that's an RNG bias, because I don't think that's necessarily consistent across all regions. I didn't think that was what was winning LCK games. I didn't necessarily think that was what was winning LEC games. To an extent, kind of, but there were like gaps that were being abused by G2 in Medline's play, for example. But I think overall, like when I'm talking about the major regions and thinking about it, it's like LPL had almost this like weird identity that was to an extent shaped by RNG, where this was, even in games where they weren't in them, like the team that was able to consistently like push outside and rotate off of that pressure was the one that was getting the better setups for fights and winning out that way. So that's something that I'm definitely going to keep tabs on throughout MSI. So from your perspective, then, do either Pentanet or UOL have a chance of defeating Royal Neverglade?
So in a best of one, like, can they beat RNG in a single game? Yes. Do I think either of these teams, like, I think it's still going to be RNG favored, but, like, do I think there's a possibility that either of these teams take a game off RNG? Like, yeah, for sure. But do I think that RNG is not going to get first in this group? No, I do not. Unless they, like, spectacularly collapse in a way that I can't foresee at this moment.
Even if they are 5 Horn every single game?
That'll be interesting. But yeah, like I think it is very unlikely. I do think that I think that UOL have a better chance of it than Pentanet. I'll say that I'm going to be relying on you a little bit more for Pentanet since I wasn't able to watch a lot of their stuff. I just talked to people from the region, and then for UOL, I watched their final, and then I watched some content with Sheepy and a few others from that have followed CIS. So this is kind of a reboot of UOL compared to last year, because if you remember last year's Unicorns of Love, I feel like most people characterize them because Gadget played weird picks in bot lane. So they'd be like, they're the team that does weird lane swaps, or they're swapping picks with Gadget and it's really crazy. And they kind of leaned into that like super old EU LCS Unicorns of Love narrative with like wacky picks and stuff, just because Gadget was playing like mages or bruisers and bot. But this team is a lot different. They actually started with a different AD carry at the very beginning of the split, named Frappy. He's a French AD carry. And I don't think it doesn't sound like it was anything against him in terms of skill, but they just needed someone who would communicate with the team a lot better. And I think you can kind of see that if you look at some of their games from the beginning of the split to the end of the split with Lodic in. Because once Lodic subbed in, I think it was like late March, they just looked a lot more coordinated. And that's probably honestly just due to language. But Lodic has been on other top CIS teams before. So you may know him from Gambit previously, I think in 2018. But yeah, so this is like I guess a slightly different team than what people think of UOL. Like if you're thinking of UOL as like wacky, crazy, fun time from last Worlds, which I don't even necessarily think was what they were all about, but that's not this team. They're a little bit more standard. I said the player to watch out for is Boss, because I think he's improved a lot. But I also think he has the tendency to be a little bit volatile as well. So whenever I pick a player to watch, it's not always like this player is like by far the best player, because I think most people would point to No Man's, and they play between kind of top and mid, which I think a lot of teams at this tournament, you're going to kind of see more of a focus around those areas as well as the jungler. But yeah, like I think for me, a lot of whether unicorns are going to be successful is like how successful Boss can be in that top lane. Whether he can force a matchup to be so volatile that he can call a jungler up to get ahead in that way. But I still think it's going to be kind of difficult for them to beat RNG, because I don't see the same attention to detail when it comes to like side wave pressure. But I do think they will. The reason why I'm highlighting unicorns is because I do think they will come in second in this group.
So I have a question.
Yes.
What is with the first pick Scion?
I mean, that's a thing though, that when you look at minor region teams, you're gonna be like, okay, like you're blind picking this every game, and you're not gonna be able to get away with that, obviously, at this tournament. Or who knows, maybe you are. What was the other weird thing I saw in their draft? Hang on.
They do like a lot of Scion Center, right? And then it's interesting because that to me indicates that they have a lot of
it was the Senna TK for like 6 games in a row, 5 games in a row.
A lot of prio on No Man's succeeding in later stage scenarios. So yeah, that's kind of like what the draft indicates to me without seeing a lot of their gameplay.
And again, like this is not, I don't consider myself a UOL expert. If someone if this video is on Reddit, like please correct me if you think this is an incorrect assessment of this team. But I would actually really agree with that. Like, I think they heavily rely on No Man's, especially in late game fights. Like, he is their carry. He's the carry of this team.
What about our friends Pentanet? I'm gonna be honest. I'm not as versed. I tried to keep like tabs on them throughout the season because it's LCO, right? And I'm scouting. You know, the scouts are always watching XD. But the
scouting those new players from Australia to come to North America.
What are you talking about? Australia is North America now. Emily.
God.
Riot literally moved the continent.
Okay.
Anyway, yeah, for me, I think that these guys are like kind of creative. Like they remind me, they're you kind of have to be this way to take games, right? To have like, because we were talking before this started about the fact that they did the lane swap before C9 did the lane swap, right? And you kind of have to have that kind of approach, because I always remember, speaking of VCS who are in this group in spirits, like the N Gigabyte Marines, always remember in it was 2017 Worlds, right, where they showed up and then they had their big like kind of breakout MSI as well, and I would ask their coach, why do you do these cheat strategies? Like your mid game macro is actually better than a lot of major region teams, But it was always like our team, our players are hard stuck like diamond, on the Korean ladder. We can't play standard in the early game. We just get blown out. So,
yeah, it's smart. It was smart.
I think that there's like a little bit of that you can kind of look for. One thing that I do like about them is that they are willing to play like these kind of. I think the big thing that we haven't touched on that RNG is susceptible for, because everyone points to Gala or like the fact that Xiaohu can't play tanks and all these things, but I think their biggest weakness is the fact that Cryan has like a limited pool and he doesn't play the skirmishing mid style that I think is going to be more popular for this version of MSI. So that's like the thing that I point to as being something that could be potentially a downfall of theirs. And we do see like a little bit more increased prio and stuff like Akali on this coming out of Pentanet, so I think that there's like a shot that they can do something with that. But for me, it's like I'm not expecting a whole lot out of these guys. But hey, I think that they'll at least be fun to watch for the most part.
Yeah, I was gonna say, from talking to people, the thing they said about them is they workshop a lot of stuff. Like these guys pay attention to a lot of other regions, they watch a lot of other regions, and so they, even if they lose through laning, they will come back through some sort of really smart and unexpected like map rotation or something weird that their team composition does that they've workshopped, or some itemization thing that they've workshopped, like something like that. So I do think this is a bunch of players who are really, I guess, aware and like used to workshopping things for themselves, which I always find interesting. But yeah, if they're going to take games and kind of overcome the like unfortunate, I don't know how to put it another way, but like hands difference kind of, that's how it's gonna have to be, kind of like how you pointed out with like then Gigabyte Marines, it would have been GAM Esports, and they would have been in this group. So it's a good tie-in.
It's the spirit of Gigabyte Marines is carried on by Pentanet. GG,
by Pentanet,
guys.
GG, yeah.
Mark it down on your calendars. Let's check it out. All right. Since we talked already a lot about Group A, which has only 3 teams in it, I think we should move on to Group B. So the big boss, I think, in this group, maybe there's more debate, just because there tends to be more debate when you're talking about the PCS. But I would say the big boss in this group is still the Mad Lions. And we can talk a little bit about how Mad Lions look as a team. Like, what have been your impressions of them from the games that you've watched?
So, Mad are definitely not the team I expected to be here. I feel like everyone is saying that, but I'll repeat it here because it's definitely not the team I expected to be here. I fully expected G2 to be here, so congrats to Mad. I actually had the chance to talk to them the other day for an unnamed project that I'll be able to announce in the future. But it was really fun to catch up with these guys because I asked them about their own team style and like how they would characterize themselves. And they said they are a skill check team. Like they really just want to load in and prove that they're better than their opponents. And they said that that mentality is what helped them come back in the Rogue series, especially after game 2. They were just like, yeah, we weren't really worried. We knew we could win. So they have a really like cool confidence about them that I love for teams going into international events like this, because especially a team that's like wasn't expected to take the region. Um, because I think it's going to matter a lot considering people's reservations around Mad Lions are that they really only started to ramp up towards the end of the split. I think when Elioya and Humanoid had a better mid jungle synergy than at the beginning of the split. But then additionally, when Elioya was able to get involved a little bit earlier, um, which I think suits them a little bit more than having the jungler kind of off farming into more of a like hard carry for the team. I think it suits Elioya a lot more, like as a player. It seems to, and also from talking to him, it just seems that he likes it a lot more, like that style of jungling. He likes being involved really early. So that's kind of something that's a little bit noticeable in their play that I saw. Instead of having Kaiser necessarily roam up, you have Elioya affecting lanes a little bit earlier, and they seemed more confident and comfortable with that. I think their laners got more comfortable towards the end of the split as well. I think you could say that to some extent, someone like Karzi was kind of underperforming for the majority of the regular season, but then stepped it up in playoffs. And he's someone that we all know is like capable of playing really well. But he seemed a lot more comfortable in playoffs than he did towards the beginning of the split. Mostly, I think like the weird thing about Mad is that if I had picked this team to like make it to something, it wouldn't have been MSI. It would have been like Worlds.
Sure.
You know, like as a slightly lower seed, but still like a very dangerous team with another split together because they are still integrating Elioya and Armut onto this team, right? So that's kind of what I noticed from them that kind of differs from their previous iteration, I guess. I don't think that because you know the players that were on that team definitely see last year's world performance as like a very kind of not great showing for them, and they have that in mind going into this. I don't see the same meta shift though, or like I don't see them struggling with what is rumored to be the meta at MSI right now, and without getting too much into like scrim rumors or whatever, talking to a lot of different people from scrim specifically. So again, like take this with as much seriousness as you would like any other scrim rumors coming out, because I feel like to some extent this is said pretty frequently at about scrims, and then teams go on stage and they tend to play a lot more passively than they do in scrims anyway. But it seems like scrims have been really, really bloody. And more importantly, it seems that they have had junglers involved with lanes a lot earlier in the game. And if that's the case, I can actually see Mad Lions being a lot more comfortable than they would have been a couple of patches ago.
Yeah, I mean, I think even without knowing about scrims, it's the easy way in which the meta has been trending. For me, like mathematically, Krugs is such a shitty camp, and I wish that MLXG were here today to delay taking Krugs until 14 minutes in the game.
He just wouldn't take them
and
somehow.
until 14 minutes in the game and show the world how it should be done. But the reality of the situation is this just I'm not obviously I'm exaggerating because there's definitely like value on the first few rotations of Krugs, but it's like the amount of time it takes versus the value you can get for an lane advantage when the jungle advantages that you could get a couple of patches ago were like 2 level leads compared to now it being more of a 1 level lead. That's consistent based on a draft situation. So I guess from that perspective, yeah, it doesn't even matter. And also like the mid changes, right? Silas, even some teams being willing to play like Kiana, Kali, these types of champs and force based on the Bali matchups, things like that around mid to get control. Like if people are gonna pick a champion like Victor, then there are way more creative answers to him than Oriana. I think it's just kind of for me the trajectory is pretty obvious. I would say like humanoid is also the kind of mid that you'd want. Like you always talk about like the humanoid Larson conversation where Larson is way more the guy you want in a late game team fight. But and not that humanoid isn't, but that's just like more where he wants to play. And then humanoid, I feel like he wants to fight a lot. He'll take way less like he'll take way lower probability fights. So I think this is more kind of what he'll excel in as well. For me, where I run into issues with Mad Lions, it's they get very clear tempo advantages from some of the plays that they make and some of the fights that they take that they end up just pissing away, either by recalling like a couple waves late or by making the wrong map trade in a situation where it's like they can get a really huge advantage by matching a fight or getting ahead of this. So I think that's for me the biggest thing is just looking at those factors and taking them into account. I think that they could easily, like a team that's like on top of their tempo all the time would be a team that could take down Mad. I'm also not completely convinced that they ever use, like I would give this team Baron if it didn't have gold attached to it because they don't set up the map well, you know? It's a skill check is a nice way to put like they try to force you to fight them mid. And it's funny because they don't, again, another part of them not using their tempo well is they'll push out like a side lane all the way. And there are a couple like nuanced conversations to have about that because I think that there are still some creative things that they'll do in terms of guaranteeing like a faster rotation to dragon and stuff like that. But so I won't say that their macro is bad because I think that there are still some creative elements to what they're doing. But I also think the one of the biggest flaws there is just if they have full control of the side, they're bad at following it up with vision to force the enemy to retake as well. So they'll end up in a lot of situations where they're kind of having to guess or force a situation that they don't necessarily need to. So for me, this is like it's being super critical of this from an RNG lens because we just talked about RNG. And this isn't even necessarily something that you have to throw at them, but I think them being like just permanently the identity of Mad Lions is that they're a young team and they keep bringing up more young players to keep that identity. It just kind of shows a bit there. So that's where when people point out, you know, Mad is not the team that we expected to be here. That's what we would look at. That said, I would say Humanoid is fucking nuts. And
he's really, really good.
He is easily, for me, a top 2 mid at this event. Just in terms of like how he plays the game. Because I think you can even debate like how good Perks is in the context of NA or whatever, but in just in terms of like how he's playing out fights and how he's playing out as a mid laner, like Humanoid is really nuts. So yep, I think don't sleep on how this team plays. Don't sleep on like Kaiser either. So yeah. Oof. I'm not totally convinced by Armut yet, but I don't like the Gnar. I will say that. It's not my favorite champion for him to play. He plays it a lot though. Let's
There are a lot
see.
of interesting Gnar hangups with some of these teams, actually, now that I'm thinking about it. It's pretty funny.
Every team overvalues Gnar, every single one.
Yeah.
But that's because he's so useful in teamfight scenarios that it happens. Okay. Now, challengers.
Dun dun dun.
Who in this group is most likely to take down Mad Lions?
I'd say it's PSG still. I think when
answer,
people
but
look
yes.
at it is a boring opinion, but we look at PSG and interesting how you characterize every team as like either it's like, oh, even if they mess up, they can win in late game team fights, or, you know, let's get super ahead from laning and just destroying people in lane. Of those two, PSG Talon, from what I've seen, are definitely the latter. This is a team that only had a gold deficit at 15 once, like throughout the entirety of this split. And it was in their loss to Beyond Gaming in week 1 of PCS. So this is a team that's very used to being ahead. I think if I was going to MSI with them and was their coach, there are two things that I'd want to immediately get down. The first would be trying to somehow learn to play from behind, because they just have not been challenged to play from behind whatsoever. And additionally, it's integrating Doggo into the lineup, because for those people that don't know, Unified was unable to attend because he had a collapsed lung, so he was not able to travel. So we hope he gets better. That sucks. Doggo is, I believe the LPL casters characterized him as like a baby Jackie Love because of the way he plays, because he's a lot more volatile than Unified, I think. He's someone who you are like, maybe they make some laning mistakes, but they're going to be really good at team fighting later, especially if you put resources into him, which Beyond Gaming did. And that's where he's from. He's actually from the team that Talon beat to get here. So it's not like a massive, it's not, I would say, even as shaky as having like D step in after being a coach, right? Like this is, the second best AD carry in the region. He's coming from the second best team in the region. It's just that the thing I would worry about slightly is that it does kind of clash, maybe not clash, but like it's different than how they've won, right? Which is like, we are gonna lock in strong leaning picks and we're gonna push out everything, and Kaiwing and River are going to control the vision and be in charge of like rotating our team to objectives and all that stuff, and we're just gonna win through sheer laning power, and we're just gonna push everything onto your side of the map until we win. And Doggo doesn't really fit into that. I think, again, he's a lot more volatile in lane. I think he makes more laning mistakes. He's obviously not going to have the same communication with Kaiwing. Kaiwing and Unified, for other people that don't know, they've been together for forever. They know each other incredibly well. They've been playing together for years. So this is a little bit of a stylistic clash, and I'm very curious to see how they deal with it, because I think they will have to change their game plan slightly, especially based on what I've heard from the meta, in that they're also going to have to get River and Kaiwing involved a little bit earlier.
Interesting that you say that, because I think the last PSG game I watched was their bot line got completely fucking destroyed by Doggo, but that's okay. It was like from the final, it was like the Tristana.
Oh, yeah.
So it's interesting to point that out, because I also, in general, for me, I look at some of the stuff that they're doing in lane when the camera's like on the different lanes, and I'm just, the laning of the laning technique of the individual member seems really behind to me. So I
wouldn't even disagree with that, but I think that they get away with it. So because they just go unchallenged.
So it's interesting to me that you characterize them that way, because I do think something that's really good about them is just like the flank angles that they find around neutrals. I would say that that's their biggest strength, more than just like snowballing over the opposition. So maybe I have a slightly different take on them because I haven't watched them as much as some of the PCS casters or stuff along those lines. But based on like my observation and my VOD review of PCS, it's more like I'm expecting them to kind of come from like behind a pit and collapse on top of their opponents. I think that can be like a cute way to play against Mad, just because they don't control vision that well. So yeah, for me, I think that this is like a matchup from first glance where I can see this being like a lot more even, right, than some of the other situations. And I'm not just saying that because this is PCS, but because like I do think that they have a good stylistic matchup versus Mad Lions. But I think Mad Lions will probably destroy them in the early game.
Yeah, so. I mean, I think the main issues I'm looking at are, I think, again, Ilyoya is a lot more comfortable getting involved early. I think that Maple is not going to be able to stand up to Humanoid very well.
Maple is a shadow of his former reputation, I will say. Like, I don't even know if his reputation is really weird because it was so much like, depending on who you talk to, it was all Maple or it was all Karsa, and it's difficult to really pinpoint like where Maple actually stood. And a lot of things that I think he benefited from were just being able to consistently shove lane and work off of support jungle control. But
also just his I've heard from people who follow the PCS a lot more closely, a lot of it has to do with like motivation. If he's really motivated to win and he's playing a ton of solo queue, you're gonna get a really great version of Maple. Okay. And if he's not motivated to play solo queue as much, you're going to get a worse version of Maple because he just won't be practicing his matchups as much and his laning will deteriorate.
Makes sense. I think that's true of most players.
It is, but I think it's apparently incredibly obvious for him because when you track his solo queue counts, it's like, oh, that's why he's not doing so great right now.
How do we feel about the other two teams in the group then? The Istanbul Wildcats and your favorite.
My favorite, Pain Gaming.
Pain Gaming.
Man, I want to root for Pain to upset people so bad. They have such a difficult task ahead of them, though. I think it's going to be really, really difficult for them. I think my favorite and or most interesting player to watch on this team is actually Karyoka, who's their jungler, who's kind of a young upstart jungler breaking into the scene this year. He's someone that people knew was like at the top in terms of mechanics for Brazilian junglers, but this is kind of the first, I guess, superstar team he's been on, not just because of the name Pain Gaming, but because of the other players on this team, like Tanones and Robo and BRTT specifically. I think this is a very volatile team because they're just seem kind of like an emotional group in like the best way and the worst way, right? So like they can, if they're winning, they can snowball that into something really cool. But I think sometimes that's why you see like a lot of volatility on this team. It took a little while for them to ramp up. I think because Lucy coming in affected team communication for a little bit initially. They came together by the end of the year. As for Istanbul Wildcats, that's the team that I know the least about in this particular group. And despite the fact that people are saying that TCL is at a much lower
level
point right now because of kind of a small exodus of players out of the region, both in terms of people picking up Turkish imports for their teams in Europe or a lot of South Korean players leaving the region. Regardless of what you think it is, most TCL experts, enthusiasts, casters, etc., they all agree that the level is a lot lower this year. than it was previously last year, and then especially in the like 2019 2018 era. So that's something to keep in mind. But still, I think that it's always hard for Brazilian teams. It's really difficult for me to think that they are going to be able to make it out of this group. They may be able to upset someone if they do something kind of cute, like, I don't know, BRTT skill checking Draven or something. I do think Carioca is a really interesting jungler to watch, though, just because, again, he's a young Brazilian jungler who is still learning, but seems to have pretty strong communication with Tinon specifically. And so if this team's actually going to do cause any sort of like major upsets, despite the fact that people will probably recognize Robo and BRTT from prior Brazilian teams. I think it's definitely going to come from mid jungle. Yeah, everyone remembers Tinones too because of the Kaboom team.
It's really funny because I had to check like the ages of these players because it's like is this like the geriatric Brazilian team?
But, I think BRTT is the oldest, right? He's the oldest player.
But it's like they're not that old, right? They're just like classic names, right?
Yeah.
They're names that people who have followed international events will recognize. So I think that's kind of a cool thing to have, especially since is BRTT still as popular as he was, or
yeah, he's still. I would say he's
Brazilian double lift.
I'm trying to think of like if he's
lift.
the most popular esports player in Brazil. I think it'd be him and Fallen, probably Fallen.
Yeah, he's.
But
30.
yeah, like he's like way up there. Yeah, like and Brazil, like for people that don't know, like this is broadcast on television. Like this is an incredibly popular team. They will get a lot of views.
Yeah, I'm sure. This is like one of those times where it's like, Ryder checking the list. It's like, okay, did TSM make it? No. Okay. Did let's see. Did we get Fnatic? No. Fuck. At least tell me we got like EDG or something. No. Okay. We got Pain Gaming though. Oh, fucking thank God. Just thank you. Holy shit. Okay. We at least got them bringing in the flagship fan bases. Let's see. We've got. Yeah. I kind of lied a bit for the meme because I would say RNG is pretty popular, but
I was gonna say I think RNG is pretty popular, but like Damwon is nowhere near as popular as like T1.
Yeah, we didn't get T1. Yeah, T1 would have been a better example to use for sure. But yeah, I think it's like thank God we at least got Pain Gaming, guys. Thank God.
You know me, I want to root for them. Like I always root for the Brazilian team to do well, even though I don't have a lot of time to watch CBLOL anymore, like I used to. And this is a team of, like I said, this is kind of a super team in some respects, with a mixture of a young player that's kind of on the come up in Carioca, and then three kind of veteran players who have either been playing like since the beginning, or they have a lot of international experience because they keep being on these teams that end up going to international competitions. So
very nice. So would you say that these guys can beat the king?
In Mad Lions?
Yeah.
That'd be really difficult. Only because I think their strengths are like, again, like mid jungle and kind of trying to get a lot of control from there. And I don't think that Mad Lions are a team that's going to let them get that control, because I think that, again, Elioya would probably be involved with his lanes earlier than Carioca would with his, especially since it's kind of, from what I've seen, it's the reverse in that, when you think of mid jungle, you either think of the mid laner playing for the jungler, so the jungler can be the carry, or the jungler playing for the mid laner, so the mid laner can be the carry. Tinones is like an incredibly stable mid laner, and they really rely on that stability to be able to affect the rest of the map. So it's the latter, not the
He's
former.
Brazil.
I think
Brazil.
in terms of the way I mentioned them, I
He's
forget. But anyway, it's mid, and they're relying on him so that Carioca can go and make plays elsewhere or farm or whatever.
he's
Um,
Brazilian crying. Got it. Cool.
but I think a team like Mad are going to easily be able to counter that for reasons that we've already talked about. And again, I don't think they have as good of a handle on how to set up the map for objectives. Like a lot of other teams, I think you can't necessarily characterize them as a team that always is ahead, because I don't think that's true either. But I do think they get away with a lot in terms of mismanaging some of their side waves, or recalling at bad times. Typically, things that you think of from minor region teams as a whole. I will say that Tinones is willing to play pretty much anything, which is always fun to watch as well. So their drafts can be kind of interesting, but yeah, I think they're going to have a kind of a tough time in this group. I hope they prove me wrong, but uh, I think they have the least chance of making it out. Again, would I put it past them to be able to take a I hate calling things in a single game format, because I feel like in a single game format it's pretty easy to have like a quote
Yeah, I
unquote
mean,
single game upset. But I think it's going to be Mad first, PSG Talon second, Istanbul Wildcats third, and Pain Gaming fourth. Istanbul Wildcats, everyone is characterizing as like a team fight team, aka if they fall behind, they can come back and out team fight you. And that is based on what little VOD review I was able to do. Again, like I'm trying to be as upfront as possible so that people can like hopefully respond on Twitter or in the Reddit thread and actually talk to me about how I should characterize these teams a little bit more if you've watched them a lot more, because I think getting stuff like that is really important. Accurate is really important. But yeah, based on what I saw from Istanbul Wildcats as well, they kind of rely on team fight scaling. It's kind of two groups of players in the like Starscreen, Ferret, Saren core, and then the Holy Phoenix Farfetch duo, in terms of those two kind of chunks coming together to make one team. Again, they're a team that ramped up throughout the majority of the split. I think a lot of people were expecting them to do well, maybe not expecting them to win out because of Supermassive taking the split, but like the regular season split.
But that bot lane though, Holy Phoenix and Farfetch. We've got the legendary birds duo, and yes, I am calling a Farfetch a legendary bird. I apologize in advance to Pokemon fans. Anyway, we have next week. So I think we'll move on to the last group then, and we'll talk a little bit about. Obviously, the king of this group is Cloud9. So, goes without saying. So I would say, continuing with the theme of the king of the group, it's Damwon Kia. But so let's talk about them first. What are your thoughts and takeaways on Damwon Kia? Because I think that they're very. It's funny because when people think about the meta right now, I think they think about Damwon Kia. When I do not, I don't think about Damwon Kia when I think of the meta. I think about RNG, which is
RNG.
really weird because RNG are not the meta. So,
I mean, I guess the thing that is really weird to me about Damwon Kia is that previously, and I'm going all the way back to their 2019 iteration, right? So when at a time where people were looking at the LCK and they're like, we need to shake it up. LCK sucks. We've been playing the T1 style for too long. Whatever else people were saying about how much Korea was suddenly terrible after not doing well at Worlds. Um, and Damwon were one of the teams that was kind of cited as like, this is the new generation, and they play a lot around their side lanes, and they're very they're different. They're like Griffin. They have a lot of raw talent. They take risks. They fight, etc., etc. And this year, I feel like they've been the most passive I've seen them, and it's very weird. This doesn't mean that they're bad at all. I'm just saying, like, in terms of what I previously thought of Damwon Kia and what they have been for the majority of this split, which is more of like a slightly slower paced, kind of allowing Canyon to control the map, really relying on Showmaker's team fighting prowess, and for just him to hold mid. I agree with some of the LCK casters who've been saying that they actually think Showmaker could afford to be a little bit more aggressive than he is, because he is just like so insanely talented that he would be able to take some of these trades that he doesn't necessarily go for. I think it's really weird to me what they have become this year when I think about the ideas I had of Damwon Kia even last year at Worlds, because I feel like
Sure.
Nuguri made a lot of those top lane matchups more volatile, and he was picking a lot of stuff that he just really liked to play or counter pick, and they were skirmishing a little bit earlier. They were getting involved a little bit earlier, and I don't know if that, again, to your point, is just how they see the meta right now, as something where they just don't need to get involved super early, where they can just put a ton of resources towards Canyon, and Canyon just becomes an absolute beast in a lot of these games. I think you need to look no further than Khan and the way he's adjusted onto this team. I know a lot of people are also, I think, pointing out Koma's involvement as well. I don't know how true that is, or how much he's had like a say in, how this team has played or how they see the meta. But I do think it's an interesting coincidence that this is the year that I've seen them play the most like quote unquote standard LCK style, aka
T1 style.
T1 style.
Which I hate
like,
calling
let's
it
be
LCK
real,
style.
guys. You're talking about T1. I even say this in 10 Thoughts,
Yeah.
which is going to go out tomorrow. I'm like, you're talking about T1, by the way. You can just say T1. Or SK Telecom T1 if you want to make the distinction between T1 now and SK Telecom T1. Because I know there are some people that really like to make that distinction. It's very weird to me, because I feel like this team could play a lot more aggressively. They don't have to, but I'm just saying they could. They have the ability.
Okay, so for me, it's not even it's okay. So there are a couple things that I want to bring up when I talk about that one. First thing that I think is good to bring up is that the jungling kind of took a weird turn after Worlds, even without really significant patch changes, where it was like, if you cannot repeat the same gank, or not gank, invade, the consistently throughout the early game and mid game, you don't do it in the first place. And what I mean by that is if you're cycling the enemy jungler's camps, he'll get more out of it when he goes and does the next round than you will on the first round, right? So people just stop invading, kind of. They just sort of, because one, like, people are using ward kills to get XP advantages for solo lanes, and then they were looking at invades as like an opportunity cost of, cycling your own camps versus giving this guy a level up, because you're probably delaying your own camps to invade, and if you can't consistently invade, then you're punishing yourself more. So So that was like kind of how I saw Damwon fitting into this, is that they also sort of went more. It's like it all came back to JDG and Kanavi, and they were right all along. Um, which it's interesting
Oh
because
no.
they're absolutely terrible. But the the fun part, or the interesting part about that, I guess, also on top of that, is the way that Khan has traditionally played. And the way that Khan has traditionally played is he plays super volatile top, and then he has terrible flanks, so he could never play like front to back. But I also think Damwon at Worlds showed a huge problem with playing like heavy split push comps. Um, in terms of like, and reacting to 1-3-1 as well from teams like Suning. And by a huge problem, I mean they looked less graceful. They still obviously beat everyone, but their mid game was their bigger problem. And the fact that you have this weird combination, and Khan is now actually flanking, I think, a lot better in terms of how he's playing mid game. And they're not able to. They just flat out avoid like a 1-4 or 1-3-1 setup most of the time, by relying on things like Scion and not prioritizing push. I think I actively sought out games where it's like, okay, they can have a sideline pressure from this top matchup, and there was like one in the entire season. So that was interesting, and I explicitly tried to find it, but it was I forget what my takeaway from that game was exactly. But I think, oh yeah, my takeaway was that they should play like that more because they looked better. But the problem is that also Canyon wasn't always there on a timer that would allow Khan to recall. Like Khan just straight up ints when he has lane agency is something that I noticed. Like he'll die like 3 times in lane. So that's my theory as to why he's playing Scion, is he just stays back in lane. Doesn't have, it's like, you're literally just showed bottom. Why are you doing this? That kind of stuff that he does. And it's like he'll have gotten his wave into tower, and he'll still be playing up. And there's no reason for him to play up when his Nidalee is showing bot lane, and then he'll die. So and it was like the Renekton and Nidalee games where they played like 2, I think. They were really weird to watch because you think about how Canyon used to play, and it's always like his ability to coordinate with his top lane was usually better than the rest, I would say. And even when you're looking for like how he's hovering for lanes to help them secure recalls, I would say he still does it better for top lane. But in terms of like this type of agency, I would say when his top laner does play up, like he can do invades, he can do stuff like that. So you still see that, but when it's he has to play on top off of his camp timers or something like that, he won't do it. So I think that if like he has to skip camps to play for a top advantage, we'll see less of that, right? That's like my biggest concern when it comes to Damwon. And then if you think about, okay, they're not playing around top, right? Or they're not playing consistently around top. Surely they're playing around bot.
Nope.
Surely they're playing around mid, Emily. Surely they're doing something.
Nope.
So yeah, it's a very weird situation, especially since I think like volatile mid jungle is going to be the biggest problem, and when a lot of people default will assume the winner is going to be either RNG or Damwon when you're talking about this, and so it's like if they can't take advantage of one of RNG's biggest problems, right, or one of RNG's biggest weaknesses, then do they just lose, So that's kind of where I am with Damwon. But I think one of the things that I love about Damwon the most is, I guess, what we would talk about, like the T1 reactive play elements, which are enemy bot lane. Like one of my favorite ones to watch was like their HLE series, which HLE is, I can't believe that was the semifinal, if I'm completely honest. It was the semifinal, right? I'm not talking out of my ass. Like
Yeah.
I have to
No, it was.
double
I
check
was
mentally.
thinking that you were going to name the HLE series that went on previously, but that wasn't HLE. I was thinking of Sandbox, and I was thinking
Yeah.
of the Con Fizz Top game.
Yeah, but
Anyway, continue.
I was watching that, and it was like the Morgan. Every time he showed in a sideline, immediately his team died for it. You know, like the trigger pull that you got out of the way that Damwon set up the map in mid game was really solid. I liked it a lot, and that was the thing that it's like if you make kind of one mistake where you're showing numbers in incorrect places, they'll demolish you, and I like that about them a lot. So.
Well, and I think when you talk about any team that's going to be a lot more like passive and not being the necessarily like the first to something, if you are relying on them to be reactive, that's what separates an actual like good team at it than the best T1 teams were that way because of how they reacted, not because they were the team reacting, if that makes sense. Like you still have to follow through on the actual execution of responding to what a team is doing in the most correct way possible. And I do think Damwon like consistently do that. I think the most not I guess frustrating. I maybe frustrating because it's like LPL brain, but like I know the abilities of these players, right? So I do know that they have a lot more champion picks than most of them have shown. And I would love to see some really like kind of insane or interesting stuff come out of them because I know they're like capable of it mechanically. But that doesn't mean obviously that they have to play that way. We even did, I guess, see some of it with the Heimerdinger support, or like I said earlier in the season, the Fizz top. So they have tried some more interesting things, I guess. But I think in terms of when people are looking at the meta shift and being like maybe Damwon won't be as comfortable with this, they might not be as comfortable with it, especially given what we just said about Khan. But they definitely have the like ability to play that way, I think. I don't know. I'm very curious to see how they do at this tournament. They're still my favorites to win because I always default to the most consistent team, which has been kind of the bane of my analysis actually for the past like few years. Is that I mean, I'll own it. That's the primary reason why I'm wrong is because I always pick the most consistent team, and then some sort of meta shift and reaction happens, and I obviously can't predict that. So, but yeah, I still think that Damwon should be a favorite to win this tournament because of that.
I mean, there were specific things I was looking for when I watched Damwon. Specifically was when they had to play a mid matchup that required a base, a jungle help to get a base, right? Like a melee mid matchup. Did they do it well? And the answer was really inconsistent. Sometimes was the answer.
Yeah.
So I think that that's something that is awkward for me because that's like for me the biggest thing that can punish RNG in early on. And then the other thing about it was just they're consistently avoiding picking a top matchup that wins, and that's the other thing, right, for RNG. So I have it's interesting also because can I ask you something about LCK? Have you read the rulebook, the official LCK rulebook?
I have not actually.
Because I want to know if there's like a fine print somewhere where you have to full swap at 8 minutes for Rift Herald. Because I need to know if this is a handicap that they've imposed upon themselves. Because doing this VOD review, it was like, why is this happening every game? Please stop.
Yeah.
When it comes to like Rift setups, actually, I think LEC teams did it the best. They have the best idea about like how to either trade for Rift, give Rift, contest Rift on certain timers. That was something that I noticed. I would say LCK and NA are the worst. And then LPL, it doesn't matter. Like sometimes they just fight you because they think they can win even if they can't. So
Yeah, I was gonna say. I
but
think
sometimes they'll
that
make
just comes
like
down to someone fighting and they
yeah.
shouldn't, or they actually have a really good setup
And
for it.
sometimes they'll make smart trades, like just trade for bot T1 or something like that instead. So it's just really inconsistent. Whereas I feel like LEC, it's like there's almost always a team that's either trying to make a better trade, or even if it's not a better trade, or kind of identifying like a swap scenario or something like that. So it was interesting to me that LCK was just like that every time, and it was just funny because Damwon Kia would have usually like these kinds of comps that spike when Rift is spawning.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was like, in some cases, it felt like they were relying on that to win the game. They're gonna find us at Rift, guys. Just chill until then. Let's see. And then someone would just pull the Rift too. It was like the lanes wouldn't. Damwon Kia give wave states to go to Rift, right? And then someone just pulls it. It's so weird to watch. Anyway, that's Damwon. So, Emily, I have to ask you also, will Infinity Esports beat Damwon Kia?
No, I don't think so. Infinity Esports was actually the team I was thinking of in terms of like bot diff, because bot lane difference actually ended up, in my opinion, from their finals, and I was only able to watch their finals. So someone please correct me if this is wrong assessment of this team, but it really seemed like. Also, can I just say there were a lot of reverse sweeps in playoffs, just generally overall, that I saw, which was kind of interesting. But for Infinity Esports specifically, White Lotus and Ackerman, who is not to be confused with Godlike, aka Ackerman, who played at the on RNG like forever ago. This is an Argentinian support, so no relation, just probably a unified love of Attack on Titan.
It spans the generations, guys. Okay.
Yeah, it really does. Like all the way back in like 2013, 14 to now.
He was in NA in 2014.
14, yeah. Because he was on. Wow. Whew.
And that's when he named.
Do you remember LMQ? Anyway. Yeah. So not to be confused with that, but this is pretty much what their finals came down to me, was kind of a massive bot lane difference. And I think they are one of the few teams here that kind of really, really heavily, like, and very obviously pour resources into their bot lane a lot more than other teams. Like I said, I think typically it's been widely accepted region to region that if you are ganking somewhat early, you are going either mid or top side typically. Maybe you're looking bot, but I think we don't see as many like actual full gank attempt spot as you do mid and top. But Infinity Esports pour a ton of resources into White Lotus, and for me, this team is very much focused on making sure that White Lotus and Ackerman are able to get ahead and then carry the game from there. I think they're going to have a tough time in this group because it's just some tough bot lanes to go up against. I mean, Detonation Focus Me, I'd say I would much more characterize them as the kind of early game setup that I previously mentioned, where they're going to go mid or they're going to go top for Arya or Evie. But against, I think C9 have a strong bot lane. I think Damwon have a strong bot lane. I think it's going to be really difficult for Infinity to rely on White Lotus and Ackerman to kind of carry them through the game, especially against those teams where I think they'll either, they'll be able to they'll be able to either stop them in bot and or be able to focus topside and just kind of crush them there. So sadly, I think Infinity are going to be last in this group, followed by Dead FM, followed by Cloud9, followed by Damwon at the top. Dead FM are kind of interesting to me. Everyone is talking about Arya as like the best LJL player. I still think that Evie is like really, really good.
Evie's fun to watch. He's always fun to watch. So
he's so good. Again, there's a little bit of an over reliance on blind picking the Gnar. We know a lot of teams are guilty of this.
If you tweet Evie with like a smiley face, I bet that'll get you more likes than any other tweet during MSI. Just because I don't know why, but it's like if you tweet about Evie, like all the Japanese Twitterers come out of the woodwork, and I don't know why. It's like whenever I tweet about a Japanese player, I get a lot of interaction.
Oh,
So it's kind of cute.
I think Evie is actually the best like Japanese, like native Japanese player that the region has.
Yeah, I mean, I just think it's interesting, like how they do have like a very clear fan base, right? And Twitter, like Japanese Twitter users are very kind of interaction focused. I've noticed.
Yes.
Like, so yeah,
I know this from anime Twitter.
it's just kind of cool that they are like they do have like a lot of these minor region teams and players have a lot of support behind them. Like that Nation FM, we talked about Pan Gaming, so I think that trying to do justice to tell the stories of these teams is important. Even though Emily, you heard her this entire show, she's arrogantly claiming she knows everything, and doesn't need to be corrected whatsoever.
Way to throw me under the bus by lying.
But yeah, I think it's really, I don't know. It's like I do want to. It makes you want to learn more about these guys, right? And to hope that they do well, even if. Obviously no one's going to be Cloud9, so it's doomed anyway. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think Cloud9 are in a really weird spot, right? Because, like, I feel like people are expecting them to just get rolled by Damwon. And I'm just talking about narratives around Cloud9 and North America in general, right? Like, people are just expecting them to get rolled by Damwon, but then there's also this, in my opinion, from the community, immense pressure for them to take every single game off of Dead FM and Infinity, because if they don't, then C9 suck and NA sucks and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So
the perception is that they're outside of Damwon, right? That this is an easier group in terms of the strengths of the lower region teams, right?
Yeah, I would say
that's
so.
accurate. So
I'd say Group B is like the highest because of, I mean. Yeah, probably because of Istanbul Wildcats more than anything else, and also depending on how you feel about PSG Talon, since PCS used to, before the LMS was defunct, the LMS used to be like kind of right under there, and VCS would be there right now if their teams could come. So I'm still upset about that, but yeah, I'd say that it's widely accepted that Dead FM and Infinity are like some of the weaker, I guess, when you compare it to a team like Istanbul Wildcats or Unicorns of Love or some of the regions where you're just going to get a lot more competition. Like, I heard one of the LJL, I believe he's a caster, it's like Namira. He basically said that he thinks that Dead FM, the only times when they've like really lost or had a lot of trouble has been when they've been so arrogant, either in their drafting or in how they've played too forwardly, and they've finally been punished for it, but it kind of takes them a lot to get to that point, right? So it is going to be kind of a shock to see them or a shock for them to suddenly now have to deal with not being able to get away with that kind of stuff, because regardless of whatever you think of C9, I don't think they're going to let that kind of like, we can, kind of skill check everyone in our region and see what we can get away with. They're not going to let you get away with that. In fact, C9 did it within their own region sometimes with perks as champion picks.
Yeah. We're not going to talk about that right now.
Is that a good transition? It's talking about C9.
Yeah, I think it works. So I'm just gonna start off by saying one thing that I think C9 do have going for them is they have a nice mid jungle duo, right? I would
Hmm.
say that they have a lot. Like if for me, I think the direction is headed way more towards like control mid jungle as a duo moving around the map, and that's a big part of why we saw like FPX kind of rising back up with Tien and Doinby.
Hmm.
But I think and of course support being the most OP role in the game yet again, the and so they have like a really good trio for that, I would say, and their coordination at times is better than Demon's. In that particular trio in the early game specifically, right?
Hmm.
And I think that that's an advantage that they have for sure. The problem that I see is that I don't think that this team plays like they understand tempo at all, which is really funny because they have perks. And perks for me has always been gotten like a lot of credit for being able to dictate tempo on G2, like that deep understanding for them. And I still see echoes of it in G2, but I feel like C9 is kind of missing it, right? Like they take really weird swaps. Like some of their
Hmm.
losses to TSM I've felt have been a result of like TSM actually having better mid game rotations around neutrals, which is really awkward to say. But yes, I don't. I'm curious, like what your thoughts are, because I didn't watch your really cool video that you did with a person better than me. So, um, but so you might
Basically
have to
for
repeat yourself.
yeah, no, it's no worries. Basically for C9, I think the thing that is, I guess, I think the thing that people are underrating going into this for C9, kind of like you said, is their mid jungle duo, and more specifically, like how genuinely good Blabber has become. Because I think I was really critical of him previously because I thought he was getting a lot of resources or being given a lot of leeway from the team itself to succeed as he was transitioning to the full time spot. And I don't think that's bad. I just think I was a little bit more down on him compared to what other people said about him last year specifically, because I thought he was, aided a lot by the team, as opposed to him individually being able to react to certain situations and stuff. And I think that's actually shifted a lot going into this year. And I don't know if it's him learning from perks or just having a lot more experience as a jungler. I think, and I'll stand by this for a while, I think jungle is a position where you can see people really grow into it sometimes, just because a lot of inability to react to something depends on pattern recognition. And if you've seen a lot more games, you just have a lot more patterns in your brain if you're someone that can retain that kind of information. And I do think that Blabber's early attention to detail and pathing have improved a lot since last year, um, which is that's something where I was like a little bit less. I was a little bit more critical of him last year than I have been this year. So anyway, if there's one thing I think it's underrating, it's actually the Blabber Perks duo, and specifically the Blabber part of that duo. Um, but for C9 specifically, I think it's still an uphill climb for them. I do expect them to get out of this group, but it's an uphill climb for them post group, given how I think they have individually talented players. And I think it's at the point where they're also very cognizant of the fact that they do get away with a lot in North America that goes unpunished for the most part. Um, and they need someone to really challenge them to adapt and learn from that. I think this is a team that's shown that they can adapt and grow in their synergy from, like, if you track the way they played at the beginning of lock-in to the end of lock-in, and then again from the beginning of the split to finals, I think you can see like a clear upward trajectory in terms of team synergy and communication. I think Blabber has the best jungle to lane communication of any jungler in NA. But I also think that now has to go a step further into how they're controlling the map and like what they're turning it into, especially in like the mid to late game, which is where we've seen them falter even in North America. Um, and against better teams, that's really where I think they're going to end up being challenged. And then it's just a question of like, can they, with their coaching staff, with the individually talented players that they do have, how much can they improve, and can they improve to the point where they do become a legitimate threat at this tournament? I think they think they can, which is honestly the most important thing.
The most important thing is believing in yourself, Emily. It's the most important
I fail on that regard, but
well, there goes that theory, since you're very successful. So there you go. I think, yeah, well, clearly self-belief doesn't matter when Emily's career is currently popping off. So
I will say I like the C9 team a lot. I think they're very fun. And again, I think they have the dreaded P word potential. And it's just going to matter like how well they adjust to the meta and how well they adjust to fixing a lot of these holes in their gameplay around controlling neutral objectives, like trying to have stronger side lane pressure. This isn't an individual thing. It's like team macro decisions.
So I think the interesting thing about the C9 Damwon matchup, right, which is what kicks us off, is I think that C9
starting off with a banger.
C9 are positioned to have an advantage in the early game against Damwon, like the way that they play. So I think that's, for me, good. But at the same time, Damwon, I think, are also very happy taking advantage of the fact that I think C9's mid-game like tempo reads are really poor in terms of their trigger pull. So for me, I think that naturally, like, both of these teams can play to their strengths, and we can have an interesting, entertaining game. But it should still, like, Damwon are just super good at capitalizing on mid-game errors right now, I think. So that's where I see it coming down to. Like, C9 have to snowball, I think, too much for that to work, and Damwon, like, try snowballing versus Sion. It's pretty difficult. So that's
first ban Sion.
Just ban the Sion. You know, it's fine. It's whatever.
The way you said that just reminded me of that epic, my favorite Reddit post of all time, the Just Tilt Them.
Just Tilt Them. It's now just ban Sion. That's the new one.
Yes, just ban Sion.
So yeah, I think that's where I am on that. I still think that there's a lot of just fundamental deficiencies in how North American teams play the game. And I don't. It's weird because a lot of people read C9 as, you know, Perks came over, so they have a chance. But I don't. I don't think the fundamental errors that exist in an A are as simple as bring over a coach or bring over a player. There's a lot of
they're not.
Stuff that happens in baseline practice in solo queue and scrims that has to kind of be fixed, because a lot of times these players come over and then they either become worse or they end up doing something else that or having to retrain. There are specific things and specific strategies that you have to play differently in NA than in other regions just because of the way the teams behave. And a lot of it is worse. So just, you have to, sometimes it's like, there are expected rotations, right, that you do throughout the game, and then it's like those will be different in NA versus somewhere else. You know, it's like they're not gonna match us at a neutral. You might think they're not gonna match us at a neutral because we obviously win, but then they do. So you try to head them off on a different part of the map, and your team is split and you die, like stuff like this. That's very interesting. Yeah, it's a complicated topic, I think. But it's not as simple as like, well, Perks will make C9 better.
Yeah.
And I'm not even saying Perks is a bad player. I'm just saying that this is just kind of a weird perception.
I'll just say, like,
yeah,
this is like in a whole other discussion in terms of North America, but everything is like interconnected. Mm-hmm. There's no like one easy solution to fixing it, and if you think you've identified a problem, that might be a problem, but it also is related to like five different other problems that are all interconnected. And even just by solving one, you can't fix them because it's like all linked together.
I'm not saying we
So,
shouldn't
yeah.
try.
No, you should try.
We should try. But it's not as simple as let's bring perks over to NA. That's all I'm going to say. Okay. So, that was fun. I have enjoyed recording this episode of Making the Rounds, which ended up being
Woo.
an hour and a half. So,
Wow, I feel like that's short compared to other Making the Rounds.
It's also long.
Episode.
It's also long compared to other ones. Like I try to keep it under an hour usually. So.
Rip.
But I do think it was cool because I get to talk a little bit hear a little bit more about minor region teams before doing my VOD review of them, which I haven't done yet because I'm a terrible person. In terms of my MSI content, I'm still trying to sort of brainstorm how I want to watch MSI if I want to do live views, because I won't be able to live view the whole thing since I have to go to work halfway through the day or halfway through the broadcast. So I'll see how it goes. Maybe it's something where I VOD review one of the games from the previous day at the start of the day, lead into the next or whatever, something like that. I will make a decision. Emily will apparently be on the desk, even though she wasn't in the announcement.
Yeah. Do you want to know how that happened? So Discord, like sometimes just either marks messages as read or like I'm clicking on them accidentally. Anyway, I missed the message and I was like, wait, is this still too late? Which is obviously
surprise,
very, very professional here. And they were like, oh yeah, no, we still want you on, but just announce it when the announcement goes out because in order to get onto the asset, you would have had to respond sooner. So that's totally my fault. And obviously, if it was not correct, people would have corrected me as soon as I was like, yo, I'm on the broadcast. So yes, I am going to be on the broadcast in stage 2. So not for this first stage, but
so for the Rumble.
The
Rumble. Okay, our team's required to play Rumble for the Rumble.
I've heard Rumble is quite popular right now.
Oh yes, Rumble is quite good. But besides that point, are they required to play Rumble in the Rumble?
I kind of hope so. I like Rumble.
Sounds good. I like it when he has the Chinese voice. It sounds like Helium Rumble. But
oh god, when he dies in the Chinese voice though, it sounds so sad.
Anyway, yeah, so that's exciting. We have what we've learned from today is that you don't have to have self-belief or preparedness and professionalism to succeed. And to get on the MSI broadcast.
Yeah, there you go. So, like, it's like if I can do it. It's like aspirational in, like, the backwards way. So, like, someone who doesn't have their shit together can do it. So can you. Oh, God. This is what happens when all you do with your life is just watch League of Legends. You don't know how to, like, function as a human.
We need the inspirational poster with you making that pose like that. But yeah, God. So check out MSI Rumble for Emily on the broadcast. Anything else you want to shout out, Emily, before we head out?
I'm doing another thing, but I can't talk about it yet. So stay tuned, I guess, to my Twitter feed.
So no professionalism, preparedness,
mystery
self-confidence,
projects,
or
that is under embargo,
or details to succeed. Got it. All right, sounds good. Maybe we'll try to coordinate and get another one out potentially before the Rumble. So see you guys around.